I went to visit my daughter after the accident, and by chance I heard my son-in-law say, "You're a burden now. Get out of here." Then he threw my girl's suitcase outside, even though she was still in her wheelchair. 1 month later, when the truth came to light, he asked my daughter for forgiveness. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. I was sitting in my sewing workshop, my hands sore from pulling the needle over the silk fabric again and again. When the phone rang, I was startled, because almost no one ever calls at this hour. The hospital's number appeared on the screen, and my heart sank. The nurse's voice on the other end was soft but rushed. "Mrs. Anna, Isabella has already been discharged, but no one has come to pick her up." I froze. The needle fell from my hand and hit the floor with a tiny sound that echoed in my head. No one went to get her? Where was Robert, my son-in-law? I left the fabric half sewn, grabbed my old purse, and ran into the street to catch the first bus to the hospital. On the way, I called Robert again and again. The phone rang for a long time, but no one answered. I gripped my old cell phone tightly, feeling the anxiety rise in me like a wave. Robert, the man I entrusted my daughter to, where was he now? Was he so busy that he couldn't pick up his wife after so many months in the hospital? I looked out the window. The familiar streets of our town passed one after another, but everything looked gray. When I got to the hospital, I practically ran to the recovery area. A young nurse guided me to Isabella's room. When the door opened, I saw her sitting in a wheelchair, thinner, her gaze vacant as she stared at the window. Her long, bright hair was now dry, pulled back in a messy bun. I knelt in front of her and took her hands. They were cold, lifeless. "Mom is here, my love," I whispered, holding back tears. Isabella barely nodded, her eyes still on the window, where the bare branches moved in the wind. I didn't dare to ask her anything. I just did the discharge paperwork in silence. The kind nurse helped me push the chair to the taxi. She handed me a bag with medicines and gave me several instructions. I nodded gratefully, although my mind was already somewhere else. Isabella and Robert's house. I hailed a taxi to take us home at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. During the entire ride, my daughter didn't say a single word. She just stared out the window. When the taxi stopped in front of the small house that she and her husband had built with so much pride, I instantly felt that something was wrong. The front yard, where Isabella used to lovingly tend her rose bushes, was covered in weeds, without a single trace of the flowers. The front door was ajar, as if no one cared to close it. I pushed Isabella's wheelchair inside. The wheels squeaked on the wooden floor. Inside, the air was cold and heavy. The wedding photos that used to hang on the wall were gone. Only the nails remained, marking the empty space. My heart felt like it was tied in a knot. This was no longer the warm home I remembered. "Isabella, stay here for a moment. I'll go to the kitchen to prepare you something to eat," I said, trying to keep my voice soft. I positioned her chair near the living room window, from where she could see the yard, although there was nothing beautiful left in it. Isabella just nodded, her hands limp on her legs. I walked toward the kitchen, hoping to find something to make her some hot soup. But when I opened the refrigerator, all I saw were some beer cans, a little bit of rotten food, and a nearly empty bottle of soy sauce. Not a single tomato, not an onion. I stood still, my hand on the refrigerator door, and a feeling of powerlessness washed over me. What had Robert done to this house? How could he have let it get to this point? Just then, I heard heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. Robert appeared, dressed elegantly as if for a party, in a shiny black suit with his hair carefully styled, but his gaze was cold, without a hint of emotion. He glanced at Isabella in the wheelchair. Then he looked at me, without saying a word. I tried to stay calm and asked, "Robert, why didn't you go to the hospital to pick up Isabella? Why is the house like this?" He shrugged and answered in a flat voice, as if he were talking about the weather. "I was busy." Just 2 words, short and sharp, like a direct stab to the heart. I didn't have time to respond before Robert took a step toward Isabella. He stared at her, with a contempt I had never seen in him before. "You're a burden now," he said in an icy voice. "Get out of here." I was paralyzed, feeling my blood run cold. Before I could react, Robert went to the bedroom. A few seconds later, he returned, dragging an old suitcase that was clearly already packed. He slammed the front door open and threw the suitcase onto the porch steps. The dull thud echoed, and some of Isabella's personal belongings scattered on the ground. I saw the blue wool scarf I had knitted for her myself lying in the dirt. I felt my heart ache. Robert turned, pointed to the door, and roared, "Old woman, take her, right now." I stood in front of Isabella's wheelchair, trying to keep my voice steady. "Robert, you can't do this to her. She's your wife. You promised to take care of her." But he only let out a dry laugh and pulled out his phone, holding it up like a weapon. "If you don't leave, I'll call security to have her removed for trespassing," he threatened with malice. I looked into his eyes, searching for any trace of the son-in-law I once loved and trusted. But no, in front of me was just a stranger, someone I no longer recognized. I turned to Isabella and gently placed my coat over her shoulders. She remained silent, her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. I wanted to say something to comfort her, but my throat was closed. I could only grip the handles of the chair tightly and push her out of that house. The wheels passed over the discarded suitcase, producing a sharp screech as if it were my own heart, breaking. As we crossed the gate, the door behind us slammed shut, and the sound echoed in the quiet evening air. I pushed Isabella's chair down the familiar street, my heart heavy, as if I were carrying a huge stone. I didn't know where to go. I only knew I couldn't let my daughter continue to suffer. Each turn of the wheels on the sidewalk sounded like a painful heartbeat, reminding me of what had just happened. Isabella remained silent in the chair, but I noticed her shoulders trembling. And then, as if all the accumulated pain had finally caught up to her, the tears began to slide down her cheeks. She didn't cry loudly or scream. She just let the tears fall, as if she no longer had the strength to resist. I stopped at a small park by the side of the road, where some old trees provided shade for a worn wooden bench. I pushed the chair there. I sat beside her and took a tissue from my purse to dry the tears from my daughter's pale face. "My love, don't cry," I whispered, my voice breaking. I offered her a small bottle of water I had in my bag, but Isabella just took it without drinking, her gaze lost in the branches of the trees. I looked at my daughter and felt a lump in my chest. Isabella had been a radiant girl, always smiling, always bringing light wherever she went. I still remember her wedding with total clarity. The small church in town shone with sunlight filtering through the colored stained glass, casting sparkles on the stone floor. Isabella was dazzling in her white dress, a dress that I myself had modified for entire nights, embroidering all my love and hope into every stitch. Robert was by her side, holding her hand, with a look full of love. During the party, he stood up in front of everyone, his voice firm and sure. "I promise to be Isabella's feet when she is tired, her hands when she feels weak. I will take care of her for the rest of my life." Those words made everyone applaud, and I, sitting in the first row, cried with happiness. I truly believed I had given my daughter to a good man, someone who would protect her forever. Now, those promises were nothing but a bitter mockery, a cruel joke of fate. I took Isabella's hand. It was ice-cold, lifeless. "Mom," she whispered in a weak voice, "what did I do wrong for him to treat me like this?" Her question was like another stab in my heart. I could only squeeze her hand tightly and say, "You didn't do anything wrong, Isabella. Mom is here. She will always be here." She looked at me with a mixture of confusion and pain, as if she were looking for an answer she herself didn't understand. After a long silence, I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Let's go home, honey," I said with a certainty I didn't feel. Isabella looked up, still lost. "Home?" she asked, as if that word no longer had meaning for her. I nodded with a forced smile. "Mom's house, the old family sewing workshop, it's the only place that's still our home." I knew that there, in that humble little house, I could protect her, give her a refuge to heal the wounds that Robert had left. I called a special taxi, one with enough space for a wheelchair. The driver, a very kind middle-aged man, helped me get Isabella in and asked about her health. As the car drove on, Isabella rested her head on my shoulder and closed her eyes, exhausted. Seeing her asleep, I couldn't help but remember when she was a little girl. She would run through the workshop, playing with the spools of colored thread, laughing loudly when she knocked a box full of needles onto the floor. "Mom, when I grow up, I'm going to make the most beautiful wedding dress in the world," she would say, as she wrapped herself in a piece of fabric like a veil. I would laugh, stroke her hair, and think that her life would always be filled with joy. Now, seeing her asleep on my shoulder, I only wished that she could regain even a little of that light from before. The taxi stopped in front of the workshop after it had already gotten dark. The small house was hidden at the end of the street. The lock creaked when I opened it. Inside, the smell of dust and old wood enveloped me. But for me, it was the smell of safety, of hard but warm days. With effort, I pushed Isabella's chair up the stairs. Each step was a battle for my tired hands. The small apartment upstairs was still the same. The wooden table with a broken corner, the sofa with the worn fabric, and the simple bed where Isabella used to sleep when she came to visit me. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, but it still felt cozy. It was still our refuge. I made up the bed for Isabella and put the old wool blanket that I had knitted for her when she was a little girl on top of it. "Mom, am I bothering you?" she suddenly said, in a voice so soft I almost didn't hear it. I turned and looked into her eyes. "Bother me? You're everything to me, Isabella. Without you, I wouldn't know how to go on living." I saw her eyes fill with tears, but she nodded, as if my words gave her a little bit of comfort. I went down to the kitchen and turned on the stove to prepare a pot of hot oatmeal. The aroma of the oats filled the air, making the room come alive. I took the bowl of oatmeal to Isabella, sat by her side, and watched her eat slowly, spoonful after spoonful. I knew that this was the first food she had truly eaten in many days. Seeing her savor every bite, I felt a small ray of hope. Although it was just a simple dish, for me it was like a promise that we would get through everything. When Isabella fell asleep, I sat next to her bed and contemplated her face under the dim light of the old table lamp. Although the room was small and everything was worn out, I knew that this was a safe place, a place where she was loved. I gently stroked her hair and whispered, "We're going to start over, honey. I promise you, we'll find happiness again." 1 week had passed since the day I brought Isabella to the sewing workshop, and our lives began to take on a new rhythm. Isabella, although still quiet most of the time, had started to try the physical therapy exercises we found on the internet. Each of her small movements, a leg that bent with effort, a hand that held on to the armrest of the wheelchair, was an immense act of courage. I stayed nearby, pretending to be busy with some spools of thread, but in reality, it was to hide the silent tears that sprang to my eyes from watching her struggle with her own body. One afternoon, as the golden rays of the sun streamed through the window, I was kneeling next to Isabella, helping her stretch her leg according to the instructions on the old phone. Some quick knocks on the workshop door downstairs startled me. "I'll go see who it is. You keep practicing," I told her, trying to keep my voice calm so as not to worry her. I wiped my hands on my apron and went down the creaking wooden stairs. When I opened the door, I saw Frank, the owner of the only auto repair shop in the neighborhood, with a small basket of fruit in his hand. He was wearing his usual worn shirt with a kind smile, but there was a hint of anxiety in his eyes. Frank had been a close friend of my husband when he was alive. He was the one who used to carry Isabella on his shoulders and laugh loudly when she got grease on her face from the workshop. "Mrs. Anna, I came to visit you and your daughter," he said, in a slightly hesitant tone as he held out the basket. "Thank you. Please come in," I replied, forcing a smile even though my heart felt heavy. I led him to the small room behind the workshop, where there was an old wooden table and some chairs. I prepared a pot of tea. The soft aroma of mint filled the air, but a tension still hung between us. Frank asked about Isabella's health, if she was eating well, if she could sleep. I answered him one by one, but his gaze wandered, as if he was looking for a way to say something difficult. "Isabella is trying very hard," I said in a low voice. "She's stronger than I imagined, but she hasn't returned to her old self yet." After a moment of silence, Frank cleared his throat and set his cup on the table. "Mrs. Anna, I have something to tell you," he began, in a more serious tone. "The other day, the local police department asked me to check the security cameras for a purse snatching that happened in front of the shop. I had to review recordings from several weeks back to find the exact moment, and then I saw something by chance. My heart began to pound, sensing something bad. "What is it, Mr. Frank?" I asked, trying to stay calm, although my hands were already trembling. He took a deep breath, as if he needed to gather courage. "It's the recording from the morning Isabella had the accident," he said slowly. "I remember that day she came to the shop to pick up the car, so I checked the video to be sure. But before Isabella arrived, a few hours earlier, Robert showed up. I felt my blood run cold. Robert? What had he done? Mr. Frank continued. His voice became more serious, filled with concern. He told one of my employees that he was coming to pick up some things his wife had forgotten in the car. Since he was a regular customer, the guy didn't suspect anything and let him into the shop without a problem. But the camera recorded that. Robert wasn't picking anything up. He crouched under the car, at the front driver's side wheel, and used a small tool to do something. He did it very quickly, in less than 1 minute. Then he closed the car and left, as if nothing had happened. I stood there, my hands clutching the edge of the table, feeling like my whole world was collapsing. And after that? I whispered, my voice trembling. Mr. Frank looked at me with compassion. 2 hours later, Isabella arrived. She greeted everyone cheerfully. She got in the car and drove off. And, you know the rest. The accident on the hill at the end of town. I closed my eyes, trying to contain the pain that was burning my chest. That accident had taken my daughter's legs from her. It had stolen the light from her eyes. Mr. Frank left a small flash drive on the table. His voice was hoarse. I made a copy here. I'm not a police officer, Mrs. Anna, but I feel like something isn't right. Robert? He didn't seem to be repairing the car. With a trembling hand, I touched the flash drive, as if it were something that could burn me. Thank you, Frank, I said, in barely a whisper. He nodded, got up, and gave me a gentle pat on the shoulder before leaving. If you need anything, count on me, he said. And he left, leaving me alone with the flash drive, and a storm in my soul. I went upstairs with the flash drive in my hand, my steps heavy as if I were carrying the weight of the world. Isabella was sitting in her wheelchair, looking out the window where the sunlight was filtering through the branches. I sat beside her, trying to keep my voice calm. Isabella, my child, I began. Do you remember that morning, when you went to the shop alone to get the car? Isabella turned to me, her eyes filled with tears, as if that memory still hurt too much. She nodded, her voice choked. That morning Robert called. He said he had an emergency at the company, that he couldn't come back. He asked me to go to the shop to pick up the car, that I had to take it to Grandma's house, and that he would get there later. His voice sounded so rushed. Mom! I took her hand. A shiver ran down my spine. Isabella's words fit together like the last piece of a puzzle that confirmed my most terrible fear. That night, when Isabella was already asleep, I was alone in the corner of the room, in front of the old laptop that I almost never used. With trembling hands, I connected the flash drive, almost dropping it. The screen lit up, and the blurry image from the security camera appeared. I immediately recognized Robert's figure, the way he walked with confidence, as if no one could suspect him. He said something to the employee. He waited for him to turn around. Then he crouched under the car, tool in hand, moving with precision. He looked around. He checked that no one was watching him. He stood up. He closed the car and left. Just 1 minute. But that 1 minute changed my daughter's life forever. I watched the video again and again. Each second was like a direct stab to the heart. There were no doubts left. This was not an accident. It was a meticulously calculated plan, a trap to end Isabella's life. I squeezed the flash drive tightly. The mixture of rage and pain burned inside me, as if it were consuming me alive. In the days after seeing the video that Mr. Frank showed me, I tried to push the horror aside to focus on taking care of Isabella. But inside me, the anger and suspicion continued to burn, like a fire that never goes out. That morning, the sun was coming softly through the sewing workshop window, illuminating the spools of old thread I was organizing. I tried to concentrate, putting each red, blue, and yellow thread in its place, as if doing so could also organize my thoughts. Isabella was in her wheelchair by the window, embroidering some simple stitches on a piece of fabric with trembling hands. Seeing her effort, the way she struggled with every movement but didn't give up, filled me with a deep pain and an immense pride. She was fighting, even if it was with small steps, to reclaim a part of the life that had been taken from her. Suddenly, her phone's ringtone broke the silence. The sharp sound startled me, making me drop a spool of green thread to the floor. Isabella looked at me with a slight gesture of doubt, and then took the phone. She put it on speaker, perhaps because she still didn't have the strength to hold it for long. A female voice, professional and cold, spoke from the other end. "Miss Isabella Roberts, this is a representative from Safe Life Insurance Company. I'm calling to confirm some details about the life insurance claim in your name. Your husband, Mr. Robert Mendoza, submitted the documents yesterday." I stood still, as if the whole world had stopped spinning. Isabella looked at me, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and confusion. She shook her head, unable to believe what she was hearing. I signaled for her to be quiet, took a deep breath, and tried to control the trembling in my voice. "Excuse me, what kind of claim are you talking about?" I asked with forced calmness. "My daughter is still here. She's still alive," the voice on the other end continued, unperturbed. "Yes, ma'am, we know. It's a claim for permanent disability due to an accident. However, we need to verify some details." I felt my heart pound against my chest. Blood rushed to my head, and a mixture of fury and horror invaded me. "Could you tell me who is listed as the primary beneficiary on that contract?" I asked in a low voice, almost a whisper. The woman responded with the same coldness. "According to the file, the only beneficiary in all cases is Mr. Robert Mendoza, ma'am." My whole world came crashing down. I looked at Isabella. She was shaking her head, her eyes filled with disbelief. "No, it can't be," she murmured, her voice broken. I told her to be silent and replied, "Thank you. I'll call you later." As I hung up, I felt my strength leave me. My legs were trembling as if my whole body had been emptied. I sat down next to Isabella. I took her hand, searching for the right words. "Isabella, did you know anything about this insurance policy?" I asked, my voice trembling. She pursed her lips, her eyes full of tears, struggling to remember. "A week before is the accident," she whispered. "Robert brought some papers. He said it was a life insurance policy, a gift for our future. He told me that if anything happened, you would be protected." I didn't read the details. He just showed me where to sign. He said everything was already completed. Me? I trusted him, Mom. I felt a rage explode inside me, like a fire that devours all control. "He said that I was the beneficiary?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. Isabella nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Yes, I thought he was doing it out of concern for the family. I didn't expect." Her voice broke, and I immediately hugged her. I held her as if I wanted to protect her from the whole world. But inside me, pain and betrayal were screaming. Robert not only tricked Isabella into signing the contract, but he also dared to lie, saying that I was the beneficiary, when in reality, he was the one who would receive everything. I got up and paced the room, trying to contain the anger. "Mom, what are you going to do?" Isabella asked, her voice worried. I turned around and looked into her eyes. "I'm going to investigate him thoroughly, Isabella. I'm not going to let him get away with this." I called the insurance company. I demanded to speak with a manager. After a few minutes of waiting, a man with a serious voice answered. Without beating around the bush, I asked for the details of the contract. He confirmed that if the insured suffered an accident that caused death, the amount to be paid would be huge, enough to change a person's life. But if the person was left with a permanent disability, the amount would still be considerable, although less. I hung up, my hands and feet icy cold. Now, I understood everything. The accident was not meant to leave Isabella incapacitated. Robert's purpose was to take her life, so he could collect that huge insurance policy. The fact that Isabella was still alive had been an unexpected accident in his cruel plan. He kicked her out of the house. He called her a burden, just because she had ruined his plan. He wanted to get rid of her, like something that no longer had value. The next morning, when dawn was barely breaking, I left the tailoring shop with a heart as heavy as a stone. I headed to the old church downtown, where the ancient stone walls and stained glass windows always seemed to offer comfort. I wanted to see Father Stephen, the elderly priest with a kind smile, who had baptized Isabella when she was a baby, and who had also officiated her wedding to Robert. He was the only person I felt could listen without judgment, who could help me find light in the darkness that surrounded me. The church was silent, only the birds in the small garden outside could be heard. I entered the confessional. I sat on the rigid wooden bench, with the screen separating me from Father Stephen. I hadn't come to confess, but to unburden the weight that was pressing on my soul. I told him everything. From the day Robert kicked Isabella out of the house and called her a burden, to the video from Frank's workshop, where I saw him sabotaging my daughter's car. I talked about the call from the insurance company, the life insurance policy that Robert had tricked Isabella into signing, and his cruel plan to take her life for a gigantic sum. I also didn't hide the dark thoughts that assailed me. The times when I wanted to make Robert pay with my own hands, when I wanted him to feel the pain he had caused my daughter. Tears ran down my face, my voice trembled. But I didn't stop. I had to say it. I needed someone to understand the storm that was raging inside me. Father Stephen listened without interrupting me. I could only hear his soft breathing behind the screen. When I finished speaking, he was silent for a moment, and then his voice resonated, deep and slow. "Anna, your pain is legitimate. No mother could bear to see her daughter treated like that. But don't let hatred guide you. Hatred will consume you before it reaches your enemy. Let justice do that work. Justice is a fire that purifies, while hatred only leaves ashes." His words were like fresh water falling on my burning mind. I stayed there, my hands clutching the edge of my dress, feeling a part of my rage disappear, making room for a new clarity. He continued in a soft but firm voice. "You are a strong mother, Anna. Use that strength to protect Isabella, to seek justice, not by destroying yourself, but by letting the truth speak for you." I left the church with lighter steps, as if a part of the weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Father Stephen's words didn't erase the pain, but they clearly showed me the path I should follow. I couldn't let anger guide me, or become someone like Robert, cruel and selfish. I had to fight for Isabella, but do it in the right way, so that she not only got justice, but also saw a strong and brave woman in her mother. When I arrived at the sewing workshop, I saw Isabella sitting in her wheelchair, embroidering a small flower on a piece of fabric. She looked up when she heard me come in. Her eyes still showed some confusion, but they were brighter than they had been days before. I sat down beside her and took her hand. "Isabella, I have something to tell you," I began in a soft but firm voice. "I know what we are facing is very difficult, but I want us to do the right thing. We are not going to get revenge on Robert in his way. We are going to use the truth, the law, to make him pay for what he did. Do you agree with me?" Isabella looked at me with tears in her eyes and then nodded. "I trust you, Mom," she whispered in a trembling voice, but full of determination. "I just want all this to be over, Mom." The next day, Isabella and I went together to the office of the insurance company in the center of town. I pushed her wheelchair down the cobblestone street, silently grateful for the supportive glances of the neighbors who passed by. Everyone had heard what had happened to Isabella, and even though they didn't say anything, I knew they were on our side. In the office, I asked to speak directly with the head of the legal department, and my voice sounded firmer than I expected. "I have proof of the fraud committed by Robert Mendoza. I want to see all the documents related to my daughter's insurance policy." In the cold, white meeting room, smelling of old paper, a middle-aged man in a suit handed us the file that Robert had submitted. I went through the pages one by one with trembling hands. Not only had he requested compensation for Isabella's permanent disability, but he had also attached a falsified medical report that said my daughter was in a deep coma with a poor prognosis and the possibility of a permanent vegetative state. Those words were like knives being plunged into my heart. Isabella, sitting beside me, pressed her lips together, trying to hold back her tears. I took her hand tightly, sharing that pain, giving each other courage. The department head pointed to a chain of emails between Robert and the insurance company employee. In one of them, when asked why he needed the money so urgently, he had written, "To cover the hospital expenses and prepare for the most expensive treatments abroad, I will do everything possible to save my wife." That blatant lie made me want to scream. He dared to pretend to be a desperate husband, when in reality, he himself had put Isabella in that situation. Isabella looked away, her shoulders trembling, but she didn't cry. "Mom, how can he say something like that?" she whispered in a broken voice. I didn't answer. I just squeezed her hand, silently swearing that I would make him pay for every false word. We left the office, with printed copies of those fraudulent emails clutched in my hand. I knew that the video from the workshop and the insurance documents were not yet enough to take down someone as cunning as Robert. He would find a way to deny everything, to invent stories to cover his tracks. I needed to know the real reason behind his desperation, why he needed the money to the point of planning to end his wife's life. That night, I sat in the small room, under the yellowish light that fell on the spools of old thread. I took out all my savings, the coins I had saved for years for emergencies. I called a reputable private detective agency in the big city, the same one that Father Stephen had recommended to me. When I heard the voice of the man on the other end of the line, I spoke with firmness. I want to know everything about Robert Mendoza, every secret, every hidden corner. I need the truth. The next 2 weeks passed in a tense silence, as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for an explosion. I lived each day taking care of Isabella and working in the sewing workshop, but inside, I was consumed by anxiety. Every phone ring, every knock on the door made me jump, as if the terrible truth about Robert could explode at any moment. Isabella, meanwhile, was improving little by little. She started to move her wheelchair around the small attic, moving from the cutting table to the window where the sun's rays came in every morning. Sometimes I would see a forced smile, a weak spark in so much darkness. Those small moments were my greatest reason to keep going. Finally, one afternoon, while I was helping Isabella with her physical therapy exercises, the phone rang. An unknown number, but I knew right away it was Mr. Roberts, the detective I had hired. "Mrs. Anna, we need to meet," he said in a serious and concise voice. "I have what you need. Hope Cafe, on the side of the highway, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon." I hung up with a racing heart, a mixture of fear and anticipation. I looked at Isabella, who was trying to stretch her leg, and told her, "I'm going out for a bit. You stay and rest. Mrs. Carroll is downstairs in the workshop. If you need anything, call her." Isabella nodded, with a curious look but without asking any more questions. She knew that she noticed my tension, but I didn't want to burden her with more worries. The Hope Cafe was far from town, hidden next to a lonely highway where only the occasional passing of trucks broke the silence. I arrived early, chose a secluded table, and held my cup of hot coffee to hide the trembling of my hands. Mr. Roberts came in, a serious-looking middle-aged man, dressed in an old coat but with sharp eyes. He left a thick file on the table, without mincing words, and began to turn the pages as he spoke. "Robert Mendoza is not just a failed businessman," he began, in a steady but heavy voice. "He embezzled funds from his own company to invest in an illegal real estate network. He thought he would earn millions of dollars, but everything fell apart. He lost everything." I reviewed the copies of the promissory notes that Mr. Roberts handed me. The figures left me stunned. Robert owed a huge sum, not to the bank, but to the people Mr. Roberts called the Mafia. The history of bank movements showed that he had been constantly transferring money, trying to cover his losses, but he was only sinking deeper. "They have him cornered, Mr. Roberts said, pushing a stack of photos taken from a distance toward me. In the images, 2 rough-looking men were pressing Robert against a dark alley. His face was pale, his eyes filled with panic. "Those guys don't play around," Mr. Roberts continued. "If he doesn't pay, his life is in danger. He needs money, and he needs it now." I looked at the photos and felt a chill run down my spine. But what made my heart stop was when Mr. Roberts pushed a small recorder toward me. "This is the recording I got from the device they put near Robert's car," he said in a lower voice. "It was recorded 3 days ago, when he went to see his mother, Mrs. Brenda." I put on the headphones, my hands shaking so much that I almost dropped the device. I heard Robert's voice, full of rage and resentment. "If she wasn't here after the accident, everything would be easier. A perfect plan, Mom. And now she's still alive, smiling, and useless debt." "Mrs. Brenda's voice responded, "Come on, son. What happened has happened. You have to figure out another way. You have to exaggerate her injuries. Say that she's about to not survive. That way the insurance will pay more. Listen to your mother." I took off the headphones. My soul was as cold as ice. The pain from Robert's betrayal, although it hurt me deeply, was not comparable to the disgust of hearing Mrs. Brenda's voice, the woman Isabella called mother with all due respect. She not only knew about Robert's plan, but she also encouraged him, pushed him to go further. I sat there, with the recorder clenched in my hand, feeling everything crumble. "Mrs. Anna," Mr. Roberts said, pulling me out of my daze. "This is what you need. But what do you plan to do with it?" I looked at him, my voice raspy. "I want the truth to be known, Mr. Roberts. I want him and her to pay, but not in their way, in the way of justice." I returned home late at night, my mind blank, as if all my emotions had been sucked out of me. Isabella was sitting on the bed, trying to stand up, holding onto the edge with her trembling hands. Seeing how strong she was, I felt pride and pain at the same time. She noticed that something in me had changed and looked up to ask, "Mom, what's wrong?" I sat down next to her, took her hand, and felt the weak warmth of her slender fingers. "Isabella, I found more of the truth," I said, my voice firm despite the inner chaos. "Robert and Mrs. Brenda planned to hurt you together, but I promise you, we are not going to get revenge like them. We are going to bring the truth to light so that society judges them." Isabella looked at me with tears in her eyes, but she nodded. "I trust you, Mom," she said, in a low but determined voice. "I just want us to be at peace." I hugged her, feeling like I was hugging my whole world. Deep down, I knew that the road ahead would have many challenges, but with this evidence in hand, I now had the necessary weapons. 1 week after the meeting with Mr. Roberts, I was on the small balcony of the sewing workshop, hanging some newly washed pieces of fabric. Lost in my thoughts, I was startled by a soft but firm knock on the workshop door downstairs. I hurried to dry my hands on my apron and went down the creaking wooden stairs. At the door was a young woman, dressed in a dark blue business suit, but her gaze was filled with anguish, as if she were carrying a burden she couldn't share. "Hello, ma'am," she said, her voice a little shaky. "I'm Lucy. I used to work for Robert Mendoza. Can I talk to you for a moment?" The name Robert immediately put me on guard, but the girl's sincere look calmed me down. "Come in," I said. I opened the door wider and led her to the small room behind the workshop. Lucy sat down, clasping her hands tightly, as if trying to contain her emotions. "I quit 6 months ago," she began, her voice low but clear. "I was the head of marketing at Robert's company. I know what he's like." She hesitated, looking at me as if to make sure I wasn't going to kick her out. I nodded, motioning for her to continue. Lucy said that she still kept in touch with some former colleagues, and that, lately, there had been talk about Isabella's tragic accident, and then the rumor that the two of them had suddenly separated. "I felt uneasy," she said, her eyes showing pain. "I couldn't stand by when I found out what Robert had done. I needed to tell you." I invited her to come upstairs to see Isabella. When she saw my girl leaning with effort against the wall, trying to take small steps with her walker, Lucy's eyes filled with compassion and anger at the same time. Isabella looked up, a little surprised to see a stranger, but she smiled weakly. "Hello," my girl said in a soft voice. Lucy looked down, as if she didn't dare to look at Isabella directly. "I'm so sorry for what happened to you," she said, her voice breaking. "I came because I thought I could help." We sat down, and Lucy began to tell her story. She said that Robert had harassed her and made advances on several occasions while she worked at the company. When she flatly rejected him, he turned cruel. He pressured her at work, stole her ideas, and took credit for her achievements until she was forced to resign. "He's a devil in the appearance of a man," Lucy said, her voice trembling with anger. I tried to forget about it, but when I heard about Isabella, I couldn't bear the guilt. If I had spoken up before, maybe everything would have been different. I took Lucy's hand, feeling the sincerity in her words. "It's not your fault," I said in a soft but firm voice. "But if you want to help, we need you." Isabella, from a corner of the room, nodded, and her gaze brightened a little. Lucy took a deep breath and said, "Robert is going to host a big party at the Grand Plaza Hotel to celebrate the company's spectacular recovery after the crisis and present a new project. He invited many important partners and the press. He wants to show himself as a successful businessman, a respectable man." She stopped, her eyes shining with a bold idea. "It's the perfect stage to unmask him." I felt my heart beat faster. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice a little shaky with emotion. Lucy explained that a friend of hers on the organizing team had asked her to review the presentation video of the company's achievements, which would be shown at the beginning of the event. "I can change that video," she said, in a low voice but with determination. "We can use the material from the workshop, the recordings of Robert and his mother, and also the documents from the insurance fraud. I would edit them into a short video that exposes him in front of everyone." Lucy's idea made me feel both excited and terrified. It was an opportunity to expose the truth, but also a risky gamble. If we failed, Robert could take revenge. I looked at Isabella. My girl was listening carefully, her hands clutching the edge of her dress. "Mom, I want to do it," she said in a soft but firm voice. I want everyone to know the truth. I don't want to keep living in fear. Her words gave me strength. Okay, Lucy, I said, looking her in the eyes. We'll do it, but we have to be very careful. For the entire week, Isabella, Lucy, and I worked in secret. Lucy brought her laptop to the sewing workshop and edited the video with impressive precision. We chose the clearest fragments from the security cameras and added subtitles that explained Robert's actions. The recording of his conversation with Mrs. Brenda was integrated into the video, each venomous word sounding like a stab. Finally, we added images of the debt documents and the insurance fraud files, enough to leave anyone breathless. Every night, when Isabella was already asleep, Lucy and I reviewed every detail to avoid making mistakes. Mrs. Anna, Lucy told me once when we finished the video, I've never seen a mother as strong as you. I smiled, but inside I only thought of Isabella, my only source of strength. On the night of the party, Isabella and I stayed home, following the live broadcast that Lucy sent us. My heart was pounding. I was squeezing Isabella's hand with so much fear that I was afraid of hurting her. The celebration began in the grand ballroom of the Grand Plaza Hotel, with bright lights and soft music. Robert went up on stage, elegant in his expensive suit, speaking in a confident voice about resilience and business ethics. He even mentioned Isabella, his dear wife who is recovering from the accident, in a tone so fake that I had to clench my teeth. In the front row, Mrs. Brenda was smiling with satisfaction, as if she had nothing to be ashamed of. The master of ceremonies went up on stage and announced, "And now, we invite you to watch the video about the success story of Mendoza Corp." The lights went out and the giant screen lit up. The first few seconds showed the company logo and triumphant music, as applause filled the ballroom. But soon, the images changed to a blurry, black and white video from the security camera at the workshop. The whole place went silent. Everyone held their breath as they watched Robert tamper with the car's brakes. The screen went dark, and then the recording was heard clearly through the speakers. If she wasn't here, everything would be easier. You have to pretend the injuries are more serious. Finally, the documents of the debts with the lenders and the insurance fraud files appeared on the screen. Screams and murmurs of horror filled the room. The journalists pointed their cameras at Robert. The flashes were incessant. He stood still for a few seconds, pale, and then, like a cornered animal, he ran to a table, took a bottle of wine, and smashed it against the screen. "Stop it! Who did this?" he shouted, his voice broken by panic. "In the front row, Mrs. Brenda fell into her seat, fainting. The ballroom became a chaos. Screams, calls for security guards, the incessant sound of the cameras. I hugged Isabella. We both watched the broadcast in silence. I didn't feel satisfaction, just a cold sense of relief. I knew that the truth had come to light, and that Robert no longer had anywhere to hide. The next morning, the scandal at Robert's party exploded and spread to all the newspapers and news channels. The images of him out of control, smashing a screen in a fit of rage, were repeated again and again on television. The sewing workshop's phone wouldn't stop ringing, from curious neighbors to reporters who wanted to interview me, but I didn't answer. I didn't want to get dragged into the whirlwind of public opinion, or listen to comments or compassion. I just wanted to concentrate on Isabella, on the path to justice that we had chosen. I prepared a pot of mint tea. The familiar aroma spread through the air, like a small comfort in the middle of the storm. Isabella was sitting in her wheelchair by the window, her gaze fixed on the small television in the corner. The news was re-airing the scenes of the chaos from the night before, and the presenter's voice sounded excited. The scandal at the Grand Plaza Hotel has revealed the true face of businessman Robert Mendoza. Isabella didn't say anything. She just gripped the edge of her blouse tightly, with a determination in her eyes that I hadn't seen since the accident. I placed a cup of hot tea in front of her and smiled softly. "Do you want me to turn off the television?" I asked her. Isabella shook her head and replied in a low but firm voice, "No, Mom, I want to watch it. I want to know what they're saying." Looking at her, I felt a kind of cold relief wash over my chest. It wasn't satisfaction at seeing Robert exposed, but the certainty that everything was starting to move in the right direction. He himself had dug his own grave, and the truth, like the fire that Father Stephen had spoken of, was beginning to purify everything. I got up and put on the most elegant black dress I had, the one I had made for a party many years ago, and that now had another meaning. I gathered all the evidence: the original flash drive from Mr. Frank, the thick file from Detective Roberts, and the copies of the fraudulent emails from the insurance company. I carefully put them in an old leather briefcase, the one my late husband had used. "I'm going out for a moment. I'll be back soon," I told Isabella in a calm voice, even though my heart was pounding. She nodded, with a look that said she trusted me completely. I left the sewing workshop and walked directly to the city police department. The streets were busier than usual, and the curious glances of the people made me feel watched. But I held my head high and kept walking with the firmness of a mother who is fighting for her daughter. Thanks to the impact of the scandal, they allowed me to see the head of investigations directly, Mr. Morales, an older man with a sharp but understanding look. He had already seen the news and knew what had happened at the party. When I entered his office, he stood up, shook my hand, and said, "Mrs. Anna, I'm so sorry for what your family has had to go through. Tell me everything." I sat down, took a deep breath, and began to tell him everything. I talked about the day Robert kicked Isabella out of the house, the video from the auto repair shop that showed him tampering with the car's brakes, the insurance contract filled with blatant lies, and the recording between him and Mrs. Brenda, where they planned to falsify my daughter's injuries. I spoke with clarity, without letting emotion get the best of me, although each word was like a wound reopening. When I finished, I placed the briefcase on the table and pushed it toward him. "Here is all the evidence," I said in a low but firm voice. "I want justice for my daughter." Mr. Morales went through the pages of the file, examined the flash drive and the printed emails. He nodded his head with a severe look. "We will proceed with the verification immediately," he said, "and I have ordered the preventive detention of Robert Mendoza for an urgent investigation." "You did well to bring me all of this," he said. I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and concern. This was only the first step, but I knew I was on the right path. That afternoon, I returned to the sewing workshop and started cleaning the fabric shelves to keep my hands busy. Isabella was practicing embroidery. Her hands were already more skilled than before, although they still trembled a little. I looked at her, and a mixture of pride and pain filled my chest. As I was concentrating on my work, I heard a car stop in front of the door. Through the window, I saw a luxurious, shiny car, which did not fit in the slightest with our small street. My heart sank when I saw Mrs. Brenda get out. Her haggard face seemed to have aged 10 years in a single night. She was wearing a silk robe, but her frightened eyes and trembling hands betrayed that elegant appearance. She didn't enter the workshop. She suddenly knelt in front of the doorway, with tears running down her made-up face. "Anna, Isabella," she sobbed, her voice broken. "I beg you, please, forgive Robert. My son only acted on an impulse." Her words left me frozen. A wave of anger ran through my body. Impulse? She called a plan to take my daughter's life an impulse? I wanted to scream in her face, to ask her how she could have been an accomplice to such a crime. But I took a step back, giving Isabella space. My daughter, in her wheelchair, advanced slowly toward the door. I stayed behind, ready to hold her if necessary, but her look told me that she wanted to face her herself. She looked directly at Mrs. Brenda, her former mother-in-law, whom she had once respected and loved. Her voice was firm, not trembling, serene but sharp. "An impulsive person could never have plotted such a calculated and cruel plan, ma'am. He wanted me to disappear. I will file for a unilateral divorce, and I am ready to face him in court." Isabella's words were like a sharp knife, cutting off any illusion in Mrs. Brenda. She opened her mouth, wanting to say something, but only broke into a heart-wrenching sob, covering her face with her hands. Isabella maneuvered the chair inside, slowly but with determination. I gently closed the wooden door, without looking back. Outside, a sudden downpour began, and the sound of the rain covered Mrs. Brenda's sobs. I stood there, with my hand on the doorknob, feeling that a painful chapter of our lives had just closed. I turned to Isabella, who was looking out the window with a calm but firm expression. "You did very well," I whispered, sitting down beside her. "I'm proud of you." The day of the trial dawned with a gray sky and heavy clouds that seemed to crush the whole town. I stood in front of the workshop, adjusting my old coat, trying to maintain an outward calm. Today was the day we would face Robert, the day to look the truth and the justice that I had fought so hard for Isabella for in the face. I looked at my daughter, sitting in her wheelchair, her hands gripping the edge of her skirt, her eyes determined but still with a slight trace of fear. "Are you ready?" I asked her in a soft voice. Isabella nodded and smiled weakly. "I'm ready, Mom. We'll get through this." Her words gave me strength, and I firmly took the handles of the chair to push her forward. In front of the courthouse, a crowd of journalists and curious people had gathered. The sound of the cameras and the insistent questions made me feel suffocated. Luckily, some kind neighbors, Mrs. Carroll from the bakery and Mr. Joseph from the grocery store, came to help me get Isabella through the crowd. They pushed her wheelchair up the stairs without saying much, just gave me a pat on the shoulder as if they wanted to give me encouragement. I nodded gratefully, my heart filled with emotion. In the darkest days, it was the people around us who became our true support. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was cold and solemn. The light that entered through the high windows fell on the marble floor, forming pale stripes. I sat in the front row, reserved for witnesses, holding Isabella's ice-cold hand tightly. She didn't say anything. She just squeezed my hand, as if looking for a little comfort. On the other side of the room, Robert was sitting next to his lawyer, haggard and deflated. The expensive suit that once fit him perfectly now hung from his frail body. He didn't look up. His gaze was fixed on the table, as if he wanted to escape from everything. A few seats back, Mrs. Brenda was there with a blank face, her eyes swollen from crying so much. Looking at her, I didn't feel compassion, only a strange sense of emptiness, as if the people who were once Isabella's family were no more than distant shadows. The trial began. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with a firm and sharp voice, stood up and opened with a forceful accusation. Robert Mendoza's actions represent the highest betrayal of trust and love. He not only planned to end his wife's life, but he also used her affection and faith to obtain personal gain. His words sounded like hammer blows, echoing in the silent room. I felt Isabella squeeze my hand more tightly, but she didn't look away. Her eyes were fixed on the prosecutor, as if she wanted to strengthen his every word. The evidence was presented one by one. When the video from Mr. Frank's workshop was projected on the big screen, a murmur of horror ran through the room. The images showed Robert tampering with the car's brakes with a cold and calculating expression. I felt a chill run through my body. Robert's defense lawyer lowered his head, unable to lift it, as if he himself knew there was no possible justification. Then, they played the recording of the conversation between Robert and Mrs. Brenda. Her poisonous voice, "You have to pretend the injuries are more serious," echoed throughout the room. Mrs. Brenda broke into tears, but no one showed compassion. The fraudulent insurance emails, the financial documents, and the loans from loan sharks were read out loud, each word unmasking Robert's miserable intentions. I looked at him. He had his head bowed, his hands trembling as they covered his face, unable to bear the truth that was being revealed. When it was Isabella's turn, I thought she would let the prosecutor speak for her, as we had planned. But suddenly, she raised her hand and said in a soft but firm voice, "Your Honor, I want to speak for myself." I froze, watching her move her wheelchair forward to the stand. The room was completely silent. All eyes turned to her. Isabella raised her head, and in a calm and clear voice spoke as if all the pain had been transformed into strength. "Robert tricked me into signing the insurance contract," she began, without taking her eyes off the judge. "He said it was for our future, for my mother." I believed him. The morning of the accident, he called me. He asked me to go to the shop to pick up the car because he was busy at the company. I listened to him, and then everything changed forever. Isabella didn't cry. She didn't accuse. She just recounted the facts. But her calmness weighed more than any word of reproach. I was sitting there, with tears falling silently down my cheeks, not out of pain, but out of pride. My girl, despite all that she had lost, was still so strong. When Isabella finished, the whole room was silent. You could only hear the sound of the court clerk writing down her statement. Robert's defense lawyer stood up, but only said one sentence, in a flat voice, "We have nothing to argue." The judge, an older woman with a severe but humane look, looked directly at Robert. "Defendant Robert Mendoza," she said, in a voice that sounded like a verdict impossible to refute. "You not only intentionally attempted to murder your wife, but you also took away her dignity, her future, and her trust. That is an unforgivable crime." She paused, looked toward Mrs. Brenda, and continued. Mrs. Brenda, as an accomplice, you helped cover up this crime, causing incalculable suffering. She struck the gavel and proclaimed firmly, Robert Mendoza, guilty of attempted murder, insurance fraud, and illegal investments, sentenced to 25 years in prison. Mrs. Brenda, accomplice, sentenced to 10 years in prison. The entire room seemed to exhale with relief. The murmuring returned to fill the air, but I could only hear the beating of my own heart. The judge added, the court also officially approves Mrs. Isabella Roberts' unilateral divorce petition, ending all legal relationship between her and the defendant, Mr. Robert Mendoza. I took Isabella's hand and felt the warmth that emanated from her slender fingers. We had done it. Justice had spoken. When the police handcuffed Robert and led him away, he suddenly stopped and turned his head to look at me. In his gaze there was no longer arrogance or hatred, only a terrifying emptiness, as if there was nothing left inside him. I looked back at him, not with eyes of victory, but with serenity. There was no longer resentment or pain, just an ending. Mrs. Brenda, led away after, didn't say a single word. She lowered her head and walked with heavy steps. I pushed Isabella's wheelchair out of the room, leaving behind the dense air and the curious glances. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the gray sky was starting to let a few timid rays of sun through. Isabella looked up, took a deep breath, and told me, Mom, we did it, didn't we? I smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a true peace. That's right, my child, I replied, my voice choked. We did it. 6 months after the trial, the warm sunlight filtered through the workshop window, illuminating the rolls of fabric perfectly organized on the shelves. The constant sound of the sewing machines mixed with laughter and conversations, completely replacing the dampness and sadness from before. The small attic, which was once our makeshift refuge, was now full of life. I stood in a corner, gently cleaning an old sewing machine, while a feeling of peace flooded my soul, a peace I never thought I would feel again. Isabella, with the help of a walker, was slowly moving from the cutting table to her own machine. Her steps, although still slow and heavy, were surprisingly firm. Her hands, which once trembled when holding a needle, now moved with skill, passing the thread and sewing with sure and precise stitches. Every time I saw her concentrate in front of a piece of fabric, I noticed a spark in her eyes. Not the radiant glow of before, but a calm light, a silent strength, like a small flame that refuses to be extinguished. Mom, I think this blouse would look good with a lace trim on the collar, Isabella said in a soft but confident voice. I smiled and nodded. Good idea, honey. Do it. I trust you. We worked together to renovate the sewing workshop and turn it into a completely new place. The old walls were painted a light cream color, which made the room look bigger. I placed small pots in the corner of the window, where the sunlight came in and made the leaves shine. In front of the workshop, we put up a new wooden sign with the words Hope Sewing Workshop engraved in delicate letters. That name was not a random idea. It was a promise between Isabella and me that we would not allow the dark past to define our future. Every stitch, every thread in this workshop carries a story of healing and rebirth. The good news spread quickly. Our story, after the trial, spread throughout the town and beyond. The newspaper articles, television reports, and neighborhood whispers turned my daughter and me into a symbol of strength. But what moved me most were not the praises, but the women who began to come to the workshop. They didn't come just to learn a trade, but to find a safe place, a place to heal their own wounds. Margaret, a single mother with sadness always reflected in her eyes, had run away from home after suffering years of abuse. Amy, a young woman of only 18 years old, had a disability in her leg after a motorcycle accident, but she always smiled when she had a needle in her hand. Carol, an older woman abandoned by her own children, found joy in sitting with the others, telling her stories while sewing handkerchiefs. They called the workshop home, and for me, that was the most valuable gift. One morning, while I was teaching Margaret to sew the hem of a dress, a group of people from the local television station unexpectedly appeared at the door. They had come to record a program about inspiring stories and wanted to interview Isabella. I was a little worried that remembering the past could hurt her, but Isabella just smiled and nodded. Mom, I want to do it. I want people to know that it is possible to get ahead. I moved to the side, watching her prepare, my heart filled with pride and nervousness. The interview was held right there in the workshop. Isabella was sitting in a chair, surrounded by women concentrated on their work, and the sound of the sewing machines created a soft melody. The journalist, a young woman with a warm voice, asked her, "Isabella, after everything that happened, the betrayal, the accident, and the darkest days, what was it that helped you move forward and rebuild your life with so much strength?" The whole workshop fell silent. All eyes turned to Isabella. She looked out the window, where the sunlight danced on the colored threads, and smiled, a sincere, calm smile, as if all the pain had dissolved. "I realized," she said in a firm voice full of life, "that some storms don't come to destroy us, but to clear the path. They teach us to rebuild our lives, stronger and with more meaning. I have my mother, my new friends here, and myself. That's enough." Isabella's words were like a gentle breeze that swept through the room. Margaret wiped her tears, Amy smiled radiantly, and Carol applauded, laughing. "That's our girl." I, from the corner of the workshop, watched my daughter in silence, with tears running down my cheeks, but with a heart at peace. Isabella's words were not only for the journalist, but for all the people present, and for me too. They reminded me that, even if we have gone through the darkest days, the light is always there. We just have to dare to look for it. After the interview, the sewing workshop became even more lively. Many other women began to arrive, bringing their own stories with them. There were days when the workshop was filled with laughter, conversations, and also shared tears. We not only made clothes, but we also sewed the broken pieces of our lives, stitch by stitch, thread by thread. Isabella, with her strength, had become a source of inspiration for everyone. That girl who was once called a burden was now the support for many hearts. Every time I saw her teaching Mrs. Amy how to hem a blouse or holding Mrs. Margaret's hand while she talked about her days of pain, I felt that my own heart was healing a little more. One afternoon, as the golden light of the sun came in through the window, I stood on the balcony looking out at the small street. The neighbors passed by, waving and smiling when they mentioned the Hope Workshop. I turned and saw Isabella laughing with Mrs. Carroll, her hands moving with skill over the sewing machine. Our story, which was once a tragedy of betrayal and pain, had become proof that even when life pushes us to the abyss, we can still get up and mend hope with the broken pieces. After everything we lived through, I understood that justice does not only come from a court's ruling, but also from the courage that lives in every person's heart. Before, I thought that revenge was the only way to protect my daughter, but I discovered that true strength lies in facing the truth, in daring to walk through the pain without letting hatred consume us. Life can be cruel, people can betray, but when we choose to get up and defend what is right, darkness cannot win. I want everyone to understand that, even if we are betrayed or hurt deeply, we can always find the light, not through resentment, but through courage and faith in the truth. Because only when we forgive the past does justice become complete and the heart finds peace. The story you have just heard has changed names and places to protect the identity of those involved. We are not telling it to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I truly wonder. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to be silent to maintain peace, or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can become a candle that lights the way for another. God always blesses, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. Now, on the final screen, I will leave 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.